Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's talk with Borys Filonenko. Katja, remind me, which date was it?
At the 15th of October.
Yeah, so on the 15th of October, we did a symposium that was called Nova Generatsiia, New Generation Before and After. And we had an open conversation about the Ukrainian avant-garde, and Borys was giving a talk, and we decided to transfer this conversation into a more dense lecture for our internet audience. So I would like only to briefly introduce Katya Ulyanova, who was curating the symposium together with me, and she will introduce Borys now, and then Borys will give us his lecture about Kharkiv.
Thank you, Anya. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Katya Ulyanova, and together with Anya Kalishka, we were curating the symposium Nova Generatsiia Before and After. This symposium is a part of a program of the Theater of Hopes and Expectations, a project that started this summer in Düsseldorf and was created by Precarpathian Theater Collective. The Theater of Hopes and Expectations was initiated by Kunstkommission and supported by the city of Düsseldorf and Kunststiftung NRW. The subject of our symposium is Nova Generatsiia magazine. It was a magazine of left formation that was the instrument of Ukrainian art and literature, of futurism and avant-garde, and was also a platform for Ukrainian cultural discussions of that period. The magazine appeared for 3 years from 1927 to 1930 and was published in the city of Kharkiv. This city now, as many other Ukrainian cities, is under constant Russian missile attacks. Many buildings in Kharkiv are heavily destroyed, both residential and cultural. One such example is the Slovo building, in Ukrainian, Budynok Slovo. It's an apartment complex built in Kharkiv in the late 20s, provided an active gathering and living space for artists, writers, and intellectuals of that period. During the 30s, the residents of the Slovo building were repressed or they were sentenced to death. And on the 7th of March 2022, a Russian shell damaged the Slovo building. This destruction continues a legacy of Russian oppression against Ukrainian cultural heritage, a subject that needs to be fully addressed. Today's speaker is Borys Filonenko. He is an independent curator and art critic from Kharkiv. He is an author of comics and editor-in-chief of East Publishing. In 2022, he is a co-curator of the Pavilion of Ukraine in 50 Nights Venice Biennale. During 2017-2021, he was a tutor and curator of the Humanities Department of the Kharkiv School of Architecture. The title of Borys' lecture is Walking Around Slovo Building of Kharkiv with Today's Perspective. So, Borys, I invite you to start the lecture. Yeah, I'm switching.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Katya. Hello, everyone, dear friends and colleagues. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this program. Today, I will speak about Kharkiv and about Slovo building, mostly about this problematic perspective from the artistic field, maybe the most from the contemporary design and urbanism. And at the very start, I'd like to say that it will be like an experimental speech in a form of collage, a sort of montage of my different thoughts about today's situation. And from this point of view, when we are looking at our own heritage from the situation of the war, of shellings, and everything what Kata described before me. It is important to say a few words about Kharkiv because it's one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, and today is the closest one to the Russian border. And today we are speaking about cultural heritage in the same time when rockets just falling down in the city. And it is important that Kharkiv was for some time a capital of Bolsheviks project of Ukrainian Soviet Republic in many ways because of this location, and it was like a project of the capital of new version of Ukraine, and Slovo building and many urban projects were realized in this time when Kharkiv was like blank sheet to make a new space for the new culture. And we will talk about the time of late 20s and 30s, and the most of the time from today's point of view. So a few facts about Kharkiv to figure out why it's so important to talk about this cultural and scientific space. Kharkiv for a long time was like a city with a big university, and for today it's still like a scientific center of Ukraine. 3 Nobel laureates, you can see them in front, statues of them in front of the main building of university. And in this picture, you can see Deshprom building, one of the most important constructivist architectural projects, and the university is situated right in the left and right side from this building. It's not on the photo, but it's the same site. Also, there is many important things about art in Kharkiv, because Kharkiv is well known for the Kharkiv School of Photography, for example, and such names as Borys Mikhailov or Evgeny Pavlov or Pavlo Makov, an artist who represented Ukraine in the last Venice Biennial, and I will talk about Pavlo Makov more in this lecture. And some facts important for me also, that the man who did special effects for the Predator movie, the Hollywood blockbuster with Arnold Schwarzenegger, was from Kharkiv. And also Knorozov, the man who was translator of Mayan tongue, was also born in Kharkiv and lived here for some time. So today we are talking about Kharkiv every time through this constant shellings. It happens around 7 months, and now it's still sometimes under shellings, but not so intense as it was before. I'd like to show you maybe the same places, but in a different forms and mediums to open up this space of Kharkiv. Here you can see an artwork by Pavlo Makov from 2014, an artwork with the title Siege of Kharkiv. It's an engraving with drawings, and what is important to say that This picture was like an imaginary way to understand what will happen with Kharkiv if Russian army will go into the Kharkiv region, because in this time Crimea was already occupied and Russian forces, Russian troops were in Donetsk and Lugansk, and Kharkiv was like the next region to go into. And this picture, Siege of Kharkiv, it's like illustration how it can happen. It's quite close to the real situation, but in 2022. And here you can see in the left side, you can see a square of freedom. It's the same place from my first slide. Yeah, you can see this constructivist form and some buildings around. And maybe it's good to start talking about Slovo building from the Square of Freedom, because Dashprom is a good example of this shiftings which happening in this point of view, what is to be contemporary in the late 20s, because for many artists and writers and theater directors, actors, and so on, it was important to say what they understand under this new challenge of modernity. What does it mean to be modern? And today we can see that between these many programs of the future, there is a lot of conflicts between them. And also inside the Slovo building, we will see that there was different groups of artists and writers who was not really well connected in this ideological way of understanding of art, of role of artists in the new world. For me, it is important to say that such a project as a Dashprom was really inspiring for another forms of art. Slovo building, like the one of the next constructivist projects, was very connected to the wider way to think what is the role of artist and art in these times. So another picture is Ivan Padalka, an artist who lived in Slovo building, and it's his work about building process. Here you can see a page from Nova Generatsiia, New Generation, and Dashprom from another more avant-garde point of view. Here again, the works by Pavlo Makov. At the right side, you can see this Square of Freedom again. In the left side, it's like another side of the glass. There is a lot of insects, cockroaches, and it's like a work about anxiety in this space, because this cultural processes in the 20s and 30s, they were very connected to the processes of building a new form of control of the people, and danger of making art, of new ways of living, new programs of understanding how to live together. All these projects were not so safe in 30s as 20s. And now in Kharkiv, we are usually can feel something like that again when we try to reconnect the story between these two periods. Here in the map, you can see how many constructivist buildings you can find in Kharkiv, in the center of the city. And this is a square of freedom. And here you can see Cyrillic letter S, what refer to the word Slovo, what means word in English. And if this project can be transformed into the English version, it will be W in from the bird's point of view. So here we can see the Slovo building with letter S from drone and from the Google Maps. And it is important to say a few things that this project was in the same time about very avant-garde way of thinking about co-living, about urbanism, about some projects inside of transformation of the city and transformation of the art. And my first point maybe is about new language as a challenge, and that Slovo building is a place where these challenges were taken and give us many results in for example, for some avant-garde poets here, it was clear that the first year of the new era is 1917, and they decided to date their works like the first year of new era, it was 1918, or the third year of new era, and it was 1920. The time was new, and also the language was like a challenge, and new urbanism also was something new, and the Slovo building became a key element in these transformations. It's important to say that it was cooperative of writers. It was built by the money of the writers with support from the party and built it by architect Dashkevich. But also inside Slovo, there was not only writers who lived here, but also editors, critics, artists, theater directors, designers, photographers, etc. And inside this building, there was a different social activities, like 2 solariums on the roof, a laundry room, a field for volleyball, also used for the football games, and also this square inside the building. It was like a ice rink and space for talking between each other and with the people who talking with you from the balcony inside this inner square. So walking together, talking about literature, hunting together, it was like activities in this new form, but also the same things, this idea to live together for the people with same professional directions. It was not so good for many other reasons. At first, yeah, we can say from today's perspective that it's not a good idea to divide people in such closed groups, because for the city it's like the end of communication, not something productive, and this division into different groups just growing up some new forms of violence between these groups, but also in the situation of the late 20s and early 30s, it was a problem of problem of connection with special forces, ЧК, who used this building as a very good constructed laboratory to fix everything what happened inside, and to make this clear view on the situation with the literature. Yes, there was like a black joke about the same project in Kiev, Rolit building, that if you want to destroy all the Ukrainian literature and culture, you can just drop the bomb on this building, and it will everything will be going to an end. So also in this cooperative living, there was some small problems, and it's also like a urbanistic rethinking of such a projects. Yeah, we know that there was a problem with coal heating because flats, apartments on the top levels was too far from the coal mountain in near the building, and it was hard to take it and go up by stairs. So also there was many insects inside, and also an unfriendly neighborship was quite a problem. A good resource to feel how it was is to read the book by Volodymyr Kulish, son of Mykola Kulish, who wrote a book titled A Word About Slovo. So a word about word, in Ukrainian Slovo pro Slovo, and it's like reportage, I don't know, a quite good text from the boy, in fact, who lived in this building for 3 years, and his story is very interesting in this, for understanding what was happening inside. I would like to illustrate my point about changing of language and how urban space connected to the literature, to poetry, to the language in this at first meaning. There is a work of Pavlo Makov, Ukrainian alphabet. You can see here blocks from Barabashovo market. It's the biggest marketplace in Kharkiv, and also in eastern part of Europe, one of the biggest markets. And in 2010s, Makov did a project about dreamings of today's citizens of Ukraine, people who live in Kharkiv, and it was like critical social project, but also about this true beliefs and dreams of everyone who live in Kharkiv. And this container, the big box with many goods inside, goods which you can sell, was like one of the symbols of this happiness and dreams, and like if you have a container, you're a happy person in Kharkiv. If you have not, you need to work better to get such a container. So this idea of happy life was transformed and interconnected with the idea of Ukrainian alphabet of Narbut, another artist, and it was like a critical statement about these containers as a new alphabet of the new life inside Ukraine. Here you can see a fragment from a new generation, Nova Generatsiia magazine, where readers asking the team of the magazine what they think about engineering as a metaphor of their literally work. And it's quite ironic question to the writers, like you are talking about yourself as about pioneers and engineers, industrializators, and what does it mean? I can see that you are building something, and these ironic questions getting very gets very important answer for me and for understanding the whole situation, that writers just talking about this interconnection between architectural urban space and their language, that in today's world, in the world of historical avant-garde, it is important that such buildings as Dashprom or another constructivistic buildings are very inspiring for the poetry, as well as poetry can inspire some architects to build a new architecture. So this idea of total artistic style of this Gesamtkunstwerk was very located in this interconnection between professional fields. So one of the examples, very well-known photo from one of the project of Vasil Yermilov, an artist, constructivist from the Kharkiv, and it's one of his realized projects. What also was not easy usually, because many avant-garde projects left in the paper but wasn't realized because of expenses, budgets, and possibility to realize them. Here, Vasil Yermilov standing and sitting near advertisement of Maiden for the writer Valerian Polishchuk, also the resident of Slovo building. Here, so we can see more photos, more points of view of this building, and maybe to talk about not new things, but also old things which are rising today when we're talking about Slovo. It's one of the photos from the very first years. It's a family of Mike Johansson in the inner space of building. And here today we can see, maybe it's a photo from before invasion to the Kharkiv region, but quite new one. And you can see how this building form is transforming, changing, because of some new additions from the residents who lives here today. And for me, it's also a very interesting transformation of constructivist project as a piece of given building, as a piece of architectural new word in 20s, and these vernacular interventions that we can see today with we can say that it's like a way to show your personal freedom in your flat, in living in the very different circumstances, where your balcony just showing your personality inside this given form. So here we can see that even windows changing and very connected to the scenarios of the residents who live inside the building now. But also, yeah, like an old question about question from today, but like a well-known problem of memory about 20s and 30s, because this natural organic process of transforming of art was stopped by repressions, and between artists in 30s and artists today there is a big gap, the hole, and today we usually talking about these different ways of how to find more information, more works, how to build bridges between today and the past, and also about the memory. And in the left photo, you can see a big desk with the names of residents of the Slovo buildings, residents of 30s. And in the right photo, it's like a graffiti with writing "My culture was shot," and it's also like a more formal way to remember, and quite contemporary vernacular vandal way to make a statement about this place. Memory of the place is again new question again, and in the same time an old one. How we remember the Slovo building, what we can do after shellings in March. Slovo building was transformed again. You can see this in the photo, and I just want to recommend you to go to the website proslovo.com. It was a project made in around 7 years ago, when one of this new residents, people who live in Slovo building now, Anastasia Kovaleva, decided to learn more about the place where she lived. And it was like a very unusual way of commemoration and a form of research, because usually people who live inside this building don't want to be memorialized and don't want to be a new museum. They just want to be in quite a gated community, closed one, like in Surges, I think. Yeah, it was also a form of defense to live inside this castle of literature. But Anastasia, she was IT specialist, and she decided to engage more people to reconstruct Slovo building, to understand who lived in one flat and who in other. It was sometimes it was easy if you take a book like this book by Vladimir Kulish that I mentioned before, but usually there was also some names but not photos, some photos and you don't know which people on them. So this website is quite good to understand also how this building was constructed and about some texts and resources that we can use today to understand more. I'd like to mention that Daniil Shtengeyev, an artist and designer from Kharkiv, did this 3D scheme for this website, and now Daniil was also an author of our comics about his home in Rubizhne. The house was completely burned down after shellings, and it's also like I would like to mention that many today's questions are always referring to the 20th century, and it's like shimmering between past and today when we're talking about strategies which were invented in a new form in this modern times, in the times of Second World War, in the times of new regimes like a Stalinistic regime or national socialistic German regime, or a fascist regime in Italy, but every time today inside the war against Ukraine, we are standing face to face with the same things, with the same problems as it was 1 century before. One of the good examples, it's an artwork by Ivan Padalka, tomato picking. You can see the date, 1932. And this picture is like a way to hide Holodomor, the situation of famine in Ukraine in this time. And sometimes in this such realistic perspective, art not talking about real life and but showing propagandistic pictures of a better life that exists somewhere in the future in utopia or in another region, in fact not in Ukraine. And this picture is even more tragic because of two things. At first, Ivan Padalka was he saw people who dying because of hunger, and he was aware of what's happening. Maybe not about this how many people dying, but he saw by his own eyes what's happening in the streets of Kharkiv. Also, Ivan Padalka was shot by KGB. He is one of the victims of the Stalinistic processes. And this picture is completely untruth view to the reality. Today we are talking about hunger again, and here you can see a work by Dana Kavelina. She did it maybe at April this year, when we just started to think about this possibility of famine and famine in Ukraine, and also, as we can see in contemporary world, countries are very connected. We are living in a global situation, and that this hunger growing wider. And another work important for me by artist N, we know that it's also a work by Nikita Kadan in his project of rethinking avant-garde art. And it's like a cover version of a drawing by Leonid Levitsky. In the original work, you can see a man who carries buckets with water, but in this picture we can see the man who carries not buckets, but like two pieces of darkness. And for me, it's like a good illustration of this point of view from today's war, when we look at Padalka and see Holodomor in the back of the picture of this tomato season. And also we look at Padalka and thinking about this famine and hunger, which can happen with us, and which also happening now in occupied regions of Ukraine. And this darkness is like a black hole you can go through today to the past, and can see these similarities or just shimmering which happening, and the darkness of all these horrors of genocide, of war, terror, mass graves that we can see today. This darkness defines this gap, and as well connecting these two periods. Yeah, here we can see how many holes and these portals to the past we can see in everyday life in Ukraine now. In the second part of my today's speech, I would like to show how inside the Slovo building we can meet representatives of different isms, and here it is important for me to mention two different directions between something what we can call avant-garde movement, like futurism and constructivism, or some forms of transformed cubism, and or cubofuturism, and in another hand the movement of Bolshevikists, also we can use the word monumentalists, who were affected by the group of new generation writers and artists, like not avant-garde artists, but like an artist who looking too much in the past and working with like anti-revolutionary forms of art, but also talking about revolution and new world. So it was a two different perspectives to show modernity, to show what's happening inside this new world and new situation. And for me, it is important to just to show and illustrate this tension, because I think these conflicts between isms are also talking about some, not only about challenges of avant-garde, but also about this very deep problems of conflicts that can lead us to the death of one isms, but just be useful for another isms. In 20s and 30s, this discussion of what is proletarian art, what is revolutionary art, was in a constant move, And unfortunately, in shrinking move, when at first it was different positions, many points of view, but at the end it was like a right and wrong position to what is proletarian art. And in this very last step, this terror against cultures started, and many artists and writers were shot and so on. So, in one hand, we can see Anatol Petritsky, a representative of a new generation group. He was an artist who worked a lot in theater with scenography and costumes, and also he was very connected to constructivism and this attention to the type of materials. We can see here in this drawing this difference of materiality between fragments of the picture. Here we can see some of his works, which was very important also for European audience. And as we know from some sources, the album of his works was in Pablo Picasso's library, and I think it's quite natural. So also Anatol Petritsky was a designer of some magazines, and here is one of my favorite covers, maybe the best one, because it's without any pictures, without any idea of ornament. And I think in this connection between new generation and another magazines in Europe, for example, things which was important for the Bauhaus or the Style, this clear layout was very important. And through the new generation, many artists and writers, and Anatol Petritsky as well, they were a part of a wider network of contemporary art, modern art of 20s and 30s. Here we can see a portrait of Mikhail Semenko, an editor-in-chief in New Generation by Anatol Petritsky, portraits of another people of that days Kharkiv, and this work quite interesting with a story behind it. The title of this work is Invalids, and this work was shown in Venice Biennial, and for our today's lecture, it is important that Anatol Petritsky and Ivan Padolka and Vasil Sedlar, Padolka and Sedlar, they were a participant of Boychukists group. They were together represented in Venice as Ukrainian artists inside the pavilion of USSR, but Ukrainians were divided in a different group. And in catalog, you can see that there was Ukraine as formation, not as a country, but it was it's quite clear that it's not Ukrainian Soviet Republic or some another sort of description. This work, you can see that it's like something between Cubist composition, which were transformed into socialism. Yeah, it's something between this idea of rhythm and net, but also it's quite figurative painting. And Petritsky told about it that it's really not easy to talk through abstract language about the war and real life. And this transition into more realistic art was not only like a way of working with realistic painting, but understanding how to talk about everyday life and people whom you can meet in the streets. So in another hand, Sedlar, Padalka, and they were residents of Slovo building. And if to talk shortly about Boychukists, it was a group of artists like villains for tourists, and this group was named after their master Mikhailo Boychuk, and their idea was to invent like a new great artistic style in intersection between of Byzantine art and modern proletarian revolution. And Boychuk was also connected to the European art because of support of Andrei Sheptitsky. He was in Europe for some time, and we can look at this also with connection of Boychukists with murals, which was made in Mexico by artists, monumentalists, by Diego Rivera or Siqueiros, and it was made in the same time. And in some paradigm, we can see that between Futurism and Boychukism, there is a lot of tension, problems, conflict, but also it was another way to show what is revolution, what is new art, which also could be an art which going through the ages and looking into old art and like artists in Europe took art from Africa or countries far from the European center to make a statement in their art. Yeah, it was the same in Boychukism, and here you can see 3 portraits. In the left, it's Metropolite Anatoly Sheptitsky, poet Taras Shevchenko, and Lenin in this Boychukism way of drawing. And many works by Boychukists were destroyed. And today, the story of Boychukism, it's also a story of different forms of discovery of pieces of art and also of defending, saving of art. And maybe if to write the story of the school, it is important to understand because of which people we have these artworks still in the 21st century. So, and here in the pages of New Generation, you can see this polemic discussion about Boychukists. And of course, it was a discussion not about their importance, but about their too much attention for an old art. At the end, I would like to show that both strategies, a futurist one, new generation one, and monumentalism and Boychukism in some way, they're still important for contemporary art. And we can look at this conflict inside the Slovo building from today's perspective with the works by today's artists. And if we want to make this line of connection between today's art and the art of the past, we can see something similar in today's strategies. My first example is VR objects in the same site, in the Square of Freedom in Kharkiv. And in the left, you can see VR object monument by Roman Minin, an artist who describes himself as trans-monumentalist. It's his own word to describe himself. For me, his strategy is very close to what Boychukists wants to do with showing, representing people's movement of today. The main character for Roman Minin is a miner from Donetsk region, and I will show some more works to understand this story of miners. But before, I can say that another strategy is to work with avant-garde as a problem, as something that happened, but something that was not realized to the end because of this terror and mass shootings, but also because of this point of view to the contemporary world as a world of conflicts in which challenges can lead us to kind of competition, who will be representative, who will live and who will not. And this conflict was very deep in the conflict between isms. Yeah, and today this critical point of view, I can say, yeah, this question about how to work with avant-garde legacy, and maybe we can continue this, realize these forms and ideas. What does it mean if we take some programs of constructivists or futurists and trying to put them in today's world? I think this is completely another strategy to work with avant-garde, but also very avant-garde way of challenging reality. And here in this VR object by Nikita Kadan, we can see just a realization of one of the projects by Vasily Yermilov. It's his monument for this Freedom Square, which was never realized. And I'll show you some more works to understand what I mean in this two ways of continuing programs of 20th and 30th. So here is more works by Roman Minin, an artist about whom we can talk like a monumentalist, as I told already. But what is important for me, yeah, it's that we can see here carpet-like multi-figure compositions. It's like a chronicle of the miner's epic tale, and it's very close to what we can see in these murals by Bolshevikists, but with another characters. And what interesting that here in Minin's work, it's absolutely fictional story, and it's like a form of aestheticization of the life of miners. Sorry, and here we can see one more work. In many ways, these pictures by Bolshevikists, they were also fictional stories. And this work by Ivan Padelka about tomatoes was like a result of such a view. Here one more story about miners, and here an alphabet with miners, and here just another strategy, critical way of thinking about avant-garde works made by the coal, so by the miners' material, we can say, and depicting works by Bolshevikists and questioning a place of their works in contemporary understanding of Ukrainian art. Here, for example, we can see the portraits by Bolshevikists on the plant, which usually standing in governmental cabinets, rooms, whereas administration working usually in this bureaucratic system, and faces of proletarians and faces of art movement, which was very close to the proletarians, is like oxymoron, like an opposition of this new social reality. Here also we can see this work with black hole, with a dot, with a blind spot. So it's a portrait of Bolshevikists, but with this impossibility to see everything. And one another example, it's work in the left. You can see a graffiti by Kamlett-Zinkivsky, and in the right side, it's a graffiti by Danil Rivkovsky and Andrei Rachinsky. Also, for me, like these two parallel directions. In one side, we could see an artist who make a poetry, make a city clear and interactive, understandable for this for many people who walk in through the city and who look at art as a part of their everyday life, with some addition of art inside it. And in another side, Rivkovsky and Rachinsky working with graffiti like an instrument for criticize today's post-Soviet cities. I think it's not correct to use today this word post-Soviet. I think post-Soviet condition finished I think in February of this year, but this project was made earlier, and it was quite a big question with which type of landscape we are having taking part in our lives. And this project was like a long sentence written in a different residential houses of Khrushchev period, and it was like a line we fucked up, line which you can take together and read it only in the gallery. But it was a huge question about labor and role of some factories and cities which was building around this proletarian way of thinking and living in another country with another ideas of contemporary life, and what's happening today when this labor is very dangerous, ecologically dangerous, also for everyone who is living here, and this critical rethinking of fabric as a core of society of the future is also perspective of these artists. So at the end, again, like a bonus, I just would like to mention some designers and designers studios from Kharkiv who, for me, are very connected to this dialogue with art of design of the 60s, and because of it connected to the design of the 20s and 30s, because for example, Vasily Ermilov was one of the professors in Kharkiv Academy of Design until also in the second part of 20th century, and many today's designers were connected through him to the 20s and 30s. So first example is 3Z Design Studio, Sergei Mishakin, Tanya Borzunova, and Dmitro Verevkin, and their design for the Biennale of Young Art in Kharkiv, which was also very urbanistic, and in the left you can see the poster, the map of the city, also with this Freedom Square here, like a central part of the new constructivist city. And again, it was very important to connect design, language, art, and the city as urbanistic landscape together in this project, and it was for me very connected form, like it was in 20s and 30s. So it's designed for the same event. Also more posters with using of Helvetica type. Design for the non-stop media, it was one of the most important biennales for the young artists for a long time in Kharkiv, and also maybe one of the most known works by the studio, but not usually known that it is their work, a logo for Never Again message, but as you know, this message today also very questioned. So, and one more design by 3Z. They work in this type. Una Collective, Uliana Bishenkova, Nika Kudinova, and Alena Solomadina. They did an investigation of Kharkiv logos and product design, and their project was not only investigation but also a question of how we can use this potential of the form of this design in today's world. And here, separately from this group working, you can see books by Uliana Bochenkova, one of the books, it's a catalog of Boychukists, and works by Alena Solomadina, where you can see how architecture and type making a dialogue, and how type going from the architectural forms of Soviet modernism and brutalism, and it's also a very new generation way of this intermediate connection. And one more work by Alena Solomadina in the facade of the building. And maybe the last example, it's Graprom Studio, Maria Narazyan and Ilya Pavlov. Their work with Kazimir Malevich and his Kiev period of work. And also here we can see an article, one of the articles which Malevich wrote for the New Generation, and was one of the contributors of this magazine. Yeah, not the last example. Few words about East Publishing, a publishing house where I'm working as an editor-in-chief. For me, it was important not only to show our books designed by 3Z Studio, and to show that we are always thinking about this multimedia, intermedia connection. We're talking about urbanism and art, and two books here are very focused on the contemporary urbanism. In the left, you can see the book by Pascal Guillen, Performing the Common City, and in the right side, it's a book about ecology and against modernization and the new challenges of the city. But also in the end, I'd like to tell that our goals and what we are doing in East Publishing, these fundamental things are very close to what Nova Generatsiia, New Generation, formulated 100 years ago, because there in their magazine, it was important to do two things. First is to make connection between the wider European communities, to make connection between artists, writers in different countries, which have would like to make an idea of new, of contemporary, and in another side, it's always a challenge. What does it mean, and how to write in this new way or make art in contemporary world? And these two challenges, I think, they quite fundamental for us and for New Generation as well. So here I'd like to stop, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Borys. Yeah, wow, it was so much information, and I just reminded myself when we started to do the project, I had the feeling that it's so complicated to get like all this informations, because so many things are not like published in English. And like, you know, the first steps to get in touch with art scene in a country in which language you're not speaking is like always super hard to do. So I think that this lecture will be a good thing for many curators, scholars, people from all over the world, hopefully to investigate more with this incredibly rich and interesting art scene and art history that is still not very visible out there. So yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you.
I have actually one bigger question that I'm aware of is a bit complicated to answer. So when we speak about this generation of artists living in Ukraine, normally we speak about the red generation or about the executed generation, right? You were, I guess, for a reason not using this term of executed generation. But I think that it's like important to mention it, what happened to this generation and how complicated it is to like formulate, I guess, what kind of political agenda was behind it, and also what kind of like political agenda was like crashing with the system. So many of those artists that you were speaking about today were in the end executed.
Yes, we can call it like an executed renaissance. It's quite used term, and for me, I can say in different ways maybe, but for me it was like a movement from this years where culture was like a laboratory and question, and everyone can propose something. What does it mean to be a proletarian artist, and what does it mean to make a new art? And all these ways of all these propositions was impossible after the moment when surrealism started to be one and only way to make art. And it was also this Stalinist shift. I think it was like one big Gesamtkunstwerk, like one big way to control all the country, not only in political but also in cultural field. And today I think it's quite clear for us in Ukraine that culture is a part of discourse, and when you would like to tell something very specific to the world, you have many possibilities, but if you're authoritarian leader, you need to have correct answers, not an answer about we have many different artists, but showing the art which working for you as a propagandistic art. And I think that art of the 20s and early 30s, before this executions and total arrests and shootings, it was not a question of propaganda in this in this Stalin form, but the question of propaganda as a form of storytelling, like in Bolshevikism. Yeah, because Bolshevikism doesn't mean that futurism is not exist. It was a possibility to live together, but it also was a constant struggling between these groups. But in one day, this struggle is not working for the social realism, and both of these groups going to be are arrested, shooted, and so on. So I think so. If to make a shorter answer, I think the question of politics and culture also raising again like a new question and in fact like an old question, and like this like a same question from the 20th and 30s, and now we're going again through this black hole from today's world and looking what was happening in 30s, and see there are many similarities and also many different results. And today we are also fighting for this executed generation here. Yeah, we still need to know more. We still need to go to KGB archives, and it will be the best situation to go inside KGB archives in Moscow, of course, because many documents are there, and it is really hard for us to go there and to take it, because as we know, KGB archives are not well structured. It's like a labyrinth with no marks on the folders, and so on and so on. So it's always a connection between art and politics, and literature and politics in contemporary situation. It is important to say, yeah, that 20th century is a question what to do with art and literature when empires are going to fall down. Yeah, but there is no church or the king who will ask you to make a picture or I don't know, any kind of mural about his fame. I don't know. It's always a question for what you're working, what you are working for, and this is a question of contemporary artists. What does it mean to be a free artist in the new world? And this freedom was shrink into this Stalinist form of unfreedom, and I think it's one of the tragedies in progress, what we can see in the 20th and 30s.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
I think what you just said about the archives is super interesting also regarding the discussion around diversity, and that Ukraine, for example, has a history that made it kind of complicated to investigate in art history, and therefore it was not visible part of art history, and we all have to do this effort to make it visible again, and to clean up the confusion of who is like Russian, who is Soviet, and who is Ukrainian artist, and to make this more, yeah, bring it to the light somehow. And it's also what I found very, very interesting is to show the pluralism of this art scene in Kharkiv, because we tend also, like looking from the art historian side, we tend to shorten the story to make it like more dense and more like, yeah, in case of storytelling, like more readable, to make this kind of, yeah, to make up this narration where so many things are happening. And thank you for showing like how like more than one group, how like the structure and the dynamics of those times were functioning.
Yeah, thank you.
Katja, you have actually.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you for this very well structured and presented lecture. It was very interesting. Yeah, and I see that I also like the part when you shown the photos of the Slovo building and how this building lives its own life, you know, with all these balconies and with all these new pieces on the facade, and I just wonder what happened with the Slovo building after the repressions. What was with this house, with this building during the Soviet period?
I think it was a process of oblivion of what was it built it for, because generations after, well, they were not connected to the art or literature. It was like a changing of idea of this building, I can say. And now it is some ways to how to describe the story of this building, because we can still follow this basic idea that this is a building for the writers and artists, and we can write the story of this building to look at new residents, and maybe some of them are writers or artists, and we can put them in this timeline of Slovo building as an artistic place. But I think in the same time is not good idea, because maybe sometimes it's good to understand deeper what was happening in this particular 3 years between the moment when people started to live there and before the day of before this huge process of arrests and executions. In this website, for example, Pro Slovo, you can see some artists and writers which were the residents of Slovo building in 60s or 80s, and I can say that as minimum one very important artist of today's Kharkiv live in Slovo building, but maybe it's not enough to put him in the story of executed Renaissance. But for me, it will be interesting to describe the story through the changing of the building, as you told in your question. Yeah, because every resident taking part in this defending of this gated community, and not to give to the people outside to be actor in this area. But in the same time, now inside the Slovo building there is a residency for the writers, and one of the apartments is like a public space, semi half public space for the discussions, for the exhibitions, and for the practice to be a resident here. And I think it's more natural way to go further with this idea of this building as a laboratory of art. So I think it's we have a possibility of many perspectives how to work with Slovo building. But in fact, yeah, after these arrests, there was this idea of this building as a place for artists and different people from culture.
Yeah, thank you, Borys, for your answers, for your lecture. Okay, I think that we may finish. Maybe Anya, you have more questions or?
No, I think it was such a rich hour, even almost 2, 1.5.
Yeah.
Thank you very much once again. It was a pleasure to listen to you once again. And
thank you so much.
hope to see you soon.